Hey, class, great to connect with you. We had a really great gathering today. So great that I wasn't able to get through everything that I wanted to share with you, which is totally fine. But we wrapped up on time today, and I wanted to portion of the lecture you could have some of my thinking and some of the concepts that I wanted to share with you. We spent the first part of our time together today asking this question of what makes learning hard and how do we think about the learner. But there's another part as well, and that's just sort of thinking about what makes teaching hard. And so how do we think about the work that we do? What does it mean for us to do a good job with our expertise as we think about the work that we're stepping into? This teaching piece is really, really important. We can learn a lot of things and we can be really, really smart, but if we can't really share it with anybody else or pass that on, that really runs into some problems. And so I wanted to take a minute to just reflect on a few thoughts with regards to that. We know from other literature, maybe you've read a bit of Michelle Weimer. She talks about this idea of how do we really shift from a teacher-centered approach to a learner-centered approach. And she really brings up 5 key elements that I just wanted to remind you of and highlight for you really quick. First of all, I think when we think about learner-centered pedagogy, we recognize the fact that there's something that's happening with power dynamics within the classroom. If I'm a teacher coming in, holding all the power, the ability and power to grade you, to judge you, to pass or fail you, and I am controlling the course by the way that I design it and the way that I use the time, those are things that I'm certainly responsible for. But you can imagine in those moments that there's a disempowering element that happens with that as well. And I think from approach, we need to think about not only the fact that perhaps we're in control of the situation, we are responsible, but how we're using our power to advocate for others within the room. How are we using our power to create an environment where people feel welcome, where people and our students feel the freedom to learn, ask questions, and be a part of that? And how do we use our power to empower? And practice perhaps a bit of learning agency that comes with teaching and learning. So our awareness of our power and play as faculty, I think, is really, really crucial as we think about this idea of teaching and learner-centered pedagogy. Second of all, we have to think about the function of the content. Content is really important. Obviously, we want our students to learn particular things. There are certain foundational things that often have to be understood before we can engage in the conversation of the topic that we're engaging in our particular course. And at the same time, I remind my students all the time that the content of the course is not simply the things that we read or the lectures that we hear. The content of the course is something that we all bring in all spills in from the outside. Every student brings a story. Every student brings a point of view. Every student brings an experience. Every student brings a bit of knowledge from their background with regards to the subject or otherwise. And all these things are at play within the teaching and learning culture and environment. And so as we think about the work that we do with our students, they're not simply just acquiring information. They're actually engaging with it. They're interacting with it. That causes, in many ways, inspiration and anxiety, fear and hope, and a bunch of emotions that comes with that as well. So I try to remind my students all the time, as you're engaging the material, as you're reading the material, don't just read for quote unquote information or content. Actually pay attention to how you're responding to the things that you're thinking about and reading. What gets you excited? What new questions arise in you? What makes you anxious? Or what makes you angry? The work thinking that's going on inside of you that is worth paying attention to. And I think it's our job as teachers is to normalize that, call that out, help students recognize the fact that there's more going on in their learning than perhaps they realize. Also, the role of the teacher is really, really crucial. We in past, you've probably heard of sage on the stage, versus guide on the side, and these type of things. I think our assumptions about learning and how one learns really shapes the role that we think that we play. If we think that our job is to disseminate information so that students have information and then they're able to do something with it, we will carry ourselves a certain way. If we believe that students are meaning making, part of our job as teachers is not only to share what we know, but to call out what our students know, to help them and give them opportunity to make sense of the meaning that they're making as they engage the content that we bring to the classroom. So in feminist theory, a lot of times this idea of pedagogy is thought of as midwifing, right? We're giving birth to something and we're sort of helping in that process. We're not the ones giving birth, but we are the ones that are coaching it out and for that to happen. Or this idea of being a guide or a fellow journeyer. There's different metaphors that we can use to sort of talk about this idea of what our role is as a teacher. And I think all of those metaphors have an interesting sort of through line, and that is there's something about engagement. We are not detached from the process. As a matter of fact, we are stepping into it. So much so that I think our role as teachers also to recognize the fact that we bring our own vulnerability into the space. If we think our job is simply to make students risk in their learning while we stay safely back, there's a dynamic there that is inauthentic. There is the sense that we're asking others to take risks that we aren't necessarily taking ourselves. And so I think part of our job as teachers is to recognize that we ourselves are stepping into a space, opening ourselves up to the possibilities of what it means for us to engage one another. Another part that we can think about is just really thinking about the responsibility of the learner. Unknowingly, I think there are times that we bring our expertise into situations where our students can actually become dependent on us. They're looking to us for the answers. They're looking to us for direction. And while certainly there are times when we need to do that in any sort of situation as a guide or a midwife or whatever, there is something about us encouraging this sense of agency that comes with learning, where the motivation is no longer external or extrinsic, that is sort of moving students along by reward and punishment, but instead we're inviting them to find motivation that's intrinsic. That's self-motivation, where they take responsibility for their learning and they recognize the fact that part of their job is to own their learning, that nobody can do that, but they can. And the job of the teacher then is to aid in that process along the way. So this switch is really, really dramatic. I think it's really interesting. I think especially for undergraduate or early, maybe master's programs, I think there are times where in many ways students do well in school because they're told what to read and then they're given prompts to write and then they write their papers and they do their readings and they do just fine. The parts that oftentimes I think become more dramatic is sort of later in graduate school or PhD work, where a lot of times the road is less traveled. The prompts are not as clear because in many ways what you're being asked to do is to articulate what you're interested in. It's your job to begin to map out the journey that you are going to take to sort of move in that direction. And that's why some researchers would say that the dissertation phase is the loneliest phase in the higher education journey. Doesn't matter if you're in residence or you're not. There's been some consistency across the board where there's this element of loneliness. Why? Well, because you're the only one doing it. There's no one around necessarily sharing your research interests. Your advisor is there, but they're not telling you every week to get an assignment in. It's really up to you, and the advisor plays a different role. So I think just being aware of the responsibility that we take in our learning evokes a whole bunch of new emotions for us. And as you get to that point, if you do feel lonely, number one, know that it's normal. So that's probably just a good feeling. But the second thing is just reach out to others, because there's a lot of us empathetically out there that see you and have experienced what you've gone through. And this is the time where we really have to kind of dig into that. So this idea of responsibility for the learning, I think, is really, really crucial. And then just the purpose of evaluation. We value what we evaluate. And I think there are ways within our classes that we can sort of think about low stakes and high stakes assignments. Even the stuff that I had you do in the first week, it really wasn't that hard. You did a video about yourself and it made you reflect a little bit on learning. But we all know that in any sort of teaching and learning environment, we're sort of gauging the environment. Who's in the classroom? What's the teacher like? How do they grade? How do they react? How do they respond? How do I adjust to that, right? All these things are going on. And so I think if we could think about low stakes and high stakes grading, we give the opportunity to students to sort of test what it's like to engage the class and to offer their opinions, and then have sort of high stakes or higher point sort of assignments later on when there's more familiarity, and I think that there's more confidence along the way as well. So all these factors, I think, help in being helping students be successful in their learning. Now, really quickly, you've probably seen this before as well, is that two elements are really, really crucial when it comes to teachers helping students. One is to have high expectations for them and also to offer highest support. High expectations is to just have a vision for them. Here's what we're going to accomplish. This is what I see in you. This is what I hope for you. This is what I think we can actually get done in this class, right? And so there's a goal for that. And then the support is really there to say, and I'm here to help you get there. And here's some ways that we're going to do that. This is scaffolding. This is finding ways and sort of on-ramps for students to find that way. Now, you probably can imagine a situation where the classroom has high expectation and low support. That's a very anxiety-ridden space, right? Or the other way around, where you could have high support and low expectations. And that's where maybe you feel great and supported in the class, but the class doesn't have a lot of direction. So high expectation and high support is really, really crucial. I think when we back up and look at it from a sort of a meta standpoint, we need to recognize the fact that in some sociological literature, we recognize the fact that we live in a world where people that are developing and growing into their role as adults to being contributing members of society, we're recognizing the fact that more expectation is placed on them to actually make it into this idea of adulting, okay? You need more education. You're case in point for that. You need more training. The skills that demand certain things of people demand more skill, more training, more ability and knowledge to actually accomplish the job. So the expectations are going up. And at the same time, what we're seeing in society is that there's also diminishing risk support. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Sometimes it's just lack of support. Other times, I think what we're realizing is that the trajectories, the career trajectories of people these days are not so lock and stock, right? They're not traditional in the sense of the word. A lot of people are having to find their way and are creatively finding new ways to do their careers and express their passions. There's something beautiful about that. And at the same time, there's not the systems or the structures necessarily to support that. So a lot of people feel the pressure of higher expectations, but also feel the lack of support that's associated with that as well. Now, let's just step back for a second. Think about this, what this means as students spill into your classroom. Think about how they're actually thinking about their learning. Are they just on their own and they just got to figure it out and that's the way it's going to be? Or is there room for them to feel some support from you along the way? Maybe support that they've never had before. So when we keep this in mind, we just recognize the fact that the students' psyches, even coming into our classes, even if they're motivated about the course, may have certain experiences with regards to the expectations that they often feel are placed upon them and also the support that's there as well. And so as teachers, we can't solve that all, but if we're not aware of it, I think we can perhaps miss an opportunity to truly understand where our students are coming from. Now, when it comes to understanding students, a word that obviously has gotten quite popular, especially for the likes of Brené Brown and others, is just this idea of empathy, right? And one of the ways that we think about empathy is this idea that empathy is more than a good intention. It's really a skill of seeing students where they are and meeting them where they need us the most, okay? We can't be everything to them, but in some ways, we cross paths in the space of the teaching and learning environment. There's certain things that they need from us. And so empathy allows us to see that. And so I think good empathy asks the question, well, what's good news to students? What is the way that I can support them in their educational and teaching and learning and meaning-making journeys? There's probably two barriers that get in the way of empathy, and I just want to briefly mention this. First of all, there's this concept of closeness bias. It's more of a psychological term, and studies would say the closeness bias happens when you have two people that, or more, but a group of people that know each other well or are in close proximity to each other. But because of that proximity, they make assumptions that they know each other well, but in actual fact, they're beginning to drift apart. They don't know each other that well. So this may happen in a marriage or a partnership or a friendship where you have two friends or two partners that are incredibly close, at least because of history or relationship, but they've stopped seeing each other as changing, growing people. And as a result, assumptions are made about who they are and what they like and what they're thinking about. And what eventually happens is that the two individuals actually begin to drift apart. So the closeness bias gets in the way and actually creates distancing because of assumptions that are made. I think that can happen, especially in the ministry context, can happen in the teaching and learning context as well, is if we are around students all the time, we can assume that we know them. We can assume that we understand what they're going through, and we take pride in maybe past experiences that we've had that are really great, and certainly that's helpful. But I think what we have to remember is that every year, the class that shows up this year is not the same as the class was last year. And when we have that mentality, it gives us the ability to not fall prey to closeness bias, where we make assumptions that actually may keep us from seeing the students that are right in front of us. A second sort of barrier is this idea of what sociologists would call this idea of speed, or I call it intra-generational speed. And I think in the past, if you were to think about like Gen Z or millennial or whatever, there were generations that have unique distinctions, and they certainly are different, but these generations were usually in 20-year sort of cycles. And so the distinctions were quite unique, and 20 years is like 2 decades, which is a really long time. What sociologists are saying is that the world is speeding up faster and faster. And so what we're finding is that the things that we're learning today, most of them will be obsolete in 3, 4, 5 years from now. So think about that with a college student. They go through college, they get out, and basically everything that they've learned has become obsolete for the new jobs, the things that they're going to do next. So because of technology, because of the world, because of information, all these things that are happening, we are rapidly moving faster and faster. And this acceleration brings about what one philosopher calls alienation, right? As things speed up, we find that we become alienated from each other. And alienated in this sense is that we have less and less shared experiences to draw from. Someone that's younger than me has a very different experience than what I have. And so it's harder for me to say, I know what that's like, or I know what you're going through, or when I was your age. You see, what happens at this point is we are making assumptions about a young person, even though they're in a completely different stage in life. So I think one of the ways that I think about this with teaching and learning is that you and I have experiences that we've had going through higher education. This allows us to have one level of empathy. The thing that we have to be careful of, and where a barrier can come in, is that we assume that the experiences that we have are the same experiences that students that are going through graduate student, undergrad, graduate student, whatever, are the same with them now, right? As a matter of fact, it's going to be completely different in most cases, right? So a person starts